Now let's turn to today's shir. Says the Alter Rebbe like this, Rak, never then. Remember we're talking about a Beinani. And the meaning of the word Beinani means someone who has no Aveirus at all. Not b'maiseh, he doesn't do anything wrong, he doesn't miss opportunities to do mitzvahs. Not b'dibur, he doesn't say anything wrong, he doesn't miss opportunities to say divrei Torah. Nor b'machshava, he doesn't miss an opportunity to think what he must, and he doesn't think any bad thoughts. But, since he's a Beinani with the Yetzer Hara, and his conquest of the Yetzer Hara is only in as much as the expression is concerned. It's not at all, like the Lashon is, he never defeats the essence of the animal, so the essence of the divine soul just defeats the expression. So during davening, he succeeds in putting Yetzer Hara to sleep. Afterwards, Yetzer Hara and Yetzer Teves are equal in their passions. And as a result, you have Teves. But you don't do anything about it. Favos, Rak Navaden. For this it is sufficient. Harashimu, the trace, b'moichen in one's mind. The intellectual trace, in other words, during davening you were inspired. After davening you're not inspired, but there's a trace of that inspiration. And there's also a hidden yira and ava b'chol ha'yemuni in the right ventricle of the heart. And again, this doesn't mean the ava mitzvah which is in the neshama. It means ava mitzvah which is left over from the hisbonenus. But v'tzarech here.
Put his Yetzer Hara to sleep
during davening, yeah.
Still promised with Ian Tefillah.
Okay, but da verstehen, was meint Ian Tefillah? There's a verschiedene types in Ian Tefillah. Okay, you have to look in Tanya Perek Chav Ches, where the Alter Rebbe discusses a Beinani who during davening Yetzer Hara doesn't only go to sleep, he becomes tougher than ever. It's not so simple to put the Yetzer Hara to sleep. In Tanya Perek Chav Ches, Alter Rebbe talks about a Beinani who davens, and his Yetzer Hara comes out with a vengeance. So he's thinking, it's not automatic that Yetzer Hara goes to sleep.
It's like the tzaddik, you shouldn't have these problems.
I'm saying, but not every Beinani is zeichet to that, number one. And until you reach that point, it takes a half a davening to reach there. But your question is a good question. Says the Alter Rebbe, it's enough, the trace of the intellectual effort of the davening and what's left over in the heart, even though it's musted. During the davening you were so inspired. Now you're not inspired. But you remember that you were inspired. That little bit of inspiration that remains is sufficient, the Hizgaber, to strengthen oneself, for lishit, and to dominate al-ra hazeh over this evil, hamisava taiva, to the desires. And remember again, there's two categories of desires. Taivas heter. The problem with taivas heter is there's a mitzvah saseh v'his kadishtim according to the Alter Rebbe. You have to iskafya. But taivas yisir is an aveira. So you have to not allow yourself the aveira. And not allowing yourself the aveira means not doing it, obviously. Not thinking proactively about getting it done, because when you think proactively about getting it done, that itself becomes the Aveda, as we learned in yesterday's shir. And there's one more thing also, we'll see in a moment. There shouldn't be to the animal Shlita, a domination, a mamshala, and a rule, in the city. First of all, to bring out his desire from potential to actual, that his body should actually be filled with an actual Aveda, right? For a Beinani to do what his fantasy tells him, that Isser is an Aveda. Even in his brain alone, to think thoughts of evil. Okay, he doesn't have the dominance in the rule, to think with his choice, in his brain. In other words, should accept willingly this thought that's evil, which ascends automatically because of the psyche of the Beinani, left from the heart to the brain canals we discussed before. But rather, miyad, immediately. When a bad thought enters his mind, he pushes it out with two hands. And distracts his mind. Miyad, sheniski, as soon as he recognizes that it's a bad thought. Doesn't accept it willingly, even to think willingly about the fantasy. And even more so, that it should enter his mind to do it, or to speak it. So, first of all, the only way, I want to just make a comment, the only way to have a Mesiach Das from a bad thought is to replace it. You can't say, stop thinking. You can't stop your brain, but you have to distract it. That's why you have to have Tanya Baal Peh, or Mishnayos Baal Peh, or Tilim Baal Peh, or Zinu Baal Peh, like it's brought in Svarim, because it gives you something with which you have to fight. That's why a Bacher in the street always has to have Tanya. Something is not beseder. I feel altes ja beseder. Darf man trachten Tanya. You have to think Tanya. You shouldn't have machshava zaris. You say Tanya, whatever is better and easier for you. But the Alter Rebbe is identifying two madrigas in Aveda of machshava. One is thinking to do the Aveda. That's already an Aveda. The second is not thinking of Aveda. Simply enjoying the fantasy. Enjoying the fantasy. A bad thought enters your mind. and you're not thinking about doing it, you push it enjoying the fact that you have this thought in your head. Both of those are Avedas. Both of those are Avedas. Thinking to do the Aveda is an Aveda, and thinking in a way that enjoys the Aveda is an Aveda as well. So Alter Rebbe says you're not inspired. The Yetzer Hara is coming to you, bombarding you with all kinds of thoughts of Taiva and so forth. So first of all, you don't think about doing it, because thinking about doing it would be an Aveda. Second of all, you don't even think about thinking about it. Once you realize that it's a bad thought, you immediately push it out. Because Alter Rebbe says, Ki amar berotzen, if you think a bad thought, berotzen, willingly, with awareness, nikir rasha, beis hasha, you call the rasha at that moment. And va'beinani, eini rasha, Beinani is not a sinner, afil sho'ach hasedim, before now forever. So, when a bad thought enters a Beinani's mind, there are two issues that the Beinani fights off. Number one, the minute he realizes it's bad, he pushes it out. And number two, he never entertains doing it. In fact, that will be a different aspect of an Aveda. Now, I want to say one nekuda. Right, we all think that bad thoughts are from Teves. The worst thought that a person can experience, the biggest Aveda, as far as Chassidim are concerned, are thoughts of Marash Cheda. Depressing thoughts, sad thoughts. My life is terrible thoughts, because these thoughts destroy a person. They bring a person down, they destroy a person. And in many, many ways, even though there's no Aveda, there's no Isser, being Ba'atzvus, it's worse than any Aveda, like the Baal Shem Tov used to say. Right, there's no Aveda to be Ba'atzvus, but it can bring you to a worse state than any Aveda could bring you. So this is what the Alter Rebbe is saying. The Beinani Shalei B'Sh'as HaTfilah, a Beinani not when he davens, he did to take Yetzer Hara equal. Yetzer Hara is bombarding him with all kinds of taivis and bad thoughts and all kinds of suggestions. Bottom line is, he doesn't act on them, he doesn't speak accordingly, and he doesn't even think, A, willingly about doing an Aveda, B, about doing it practically. But so far, we only talked about Natan Lamokim. Thoughts of Aveda between man and God. I don't think about doing a sin. I don't think about Hashem is not watching me. I'll tell you a cute little maisele, just for the sake of telling you a story. The Pinchas Koretz had a Talmud, his name was Babad, a Greiser Gon, a Greiser Tzaddik, Talmud from Pinchas Koretz. I heard this from a Galatzana Yid, a big chassid, and he had a lot of tzaddis. And at a certain point, he had so much tzaddis that he was asking himself, does Hashem know b'chal how much he suffers? As soon as he thought that thought, he realized that he thought thought which is bedakas, the dakas shniyas, the opposite of Achtas Hashem. So he ran to his Rebbe to Koretz, to the Pinchas Koretz. He rides into Koretz on his wagon and drives by the Rebbe's house to go, put the horses in the stable and so forth. The Rebbe opens up the window, pokes his head out, and he's driving by, and the Rebbe says, "As ich weiß nicht der Rebbeinu Shalom." He says, "If I know you're tzaddik, the Rebbe doesn't know." So he just kept going. He went straight back home. He didn't even stop. This is a heater from Aveda. So the Alter Rebbe finishes the Peirik, v'chein b'dvara b'shatan lach Aveda. That it's an Aveda to think a bad thought about a fellow Jew. Not only not to think thoughts of Aveda, thoughts of depression, and not to think bad about a fellow Jew. The Alter Rebbe, he gets the Kiddush, Nova no lekveya avas re'im belibe. The end of Chabez, Ahuva Yacheverei, on page Kuf Lamed with base 270, Alter Rebbe says, V'ish eseros re'eyu al tachshavu bilvovom. You shouldn't think bad thoughts about a Jew, and the Alter Rebbe here indicates that a machshava zara, thinking a bad thought about another Jew, is an Aveda. All of a sudden Judaism got hard, very hard. That as soon as it enters from his heart to his mind, some kind of a holding on to a grudge or a hatred, God forbid, or he's a kin or a jealousy, a kas or anger, a kpeda, or a general critique of a fellow, v'demein and so forth. He doesn't allow these thoughts to be entertained by his brain with his mind willingly. If they're going to happen, you can't help. We're human. But then you push them out instantaneously. Moreover, to the contrary, the mind dominates and rules over the spirit and the heart. To the exact contrary. To behave with his fellow with a midah of chesed, and he actually shows him a greater measure of love. What could say to suffer from him till the very extreme. In other words, a person is mean to you when you're Veistach, the Lashon in the Mishnah, in the Gemara, which is brought in the Rambam in Hilchos Deis, that love and veinu meilvim, Shem mechapos and veinu meshivim. On Avzei state, Yisrael asher b'cha is spoiled. What's the beginning of that pasuk? The pasuk that the Rambam brings in Hilchos Deis of Perek Vav, he brings it in two places actually, that a Yid who's able to put up with verbal abuse and all kinds of other abuse, and his idea is it's an Aveda for me to think bad thoughts about my fellow, which is an unbelievable madrege. Not I don't do bad thoughts, I don't think bad thoughts about my fellow, because thinking about thought about a fellow is an Aveda. And not to get angry, God forbid, nor to pay him back measure for measure, evil for evil. But to the contrary, ligmail, to give, l'chayavim, to the guilty, toiv is good. As written in Zayah, Limud Yosef and his brothers. Yosef Ataka was an amazing guy. his brothers basically killed him. And he treated them only with love and with kindness. Right? So the Alter Rebbe finished the Perek by saying that there has to be also, in Bein Adam Lachaveri, there's not only Avedas in Maisa and in Dibur, like Lashon Hara, there's Avedas in Machshav and Lachaveri as well. And in Mashpiyim used to always say that the last Lashon, Lilmed and Yezav Mechav, is even more than Leiliches Chas V'Shalom, Leilisham Lekapal Chas V'Shalom, because he was not only not that he gave back, he didn't give back what they gave him, but it was Mishalom Teva Tachasara. He gave back good instead of bad, which is even a higher Madrei.